Welcome to the fourth and last tutorial in web browser control, the embedded web browser for C#. The program we're creating is this, and at first you'll probably look at this and go, wow, that looks really boring. It's like two text boxes and a label. But in fact, it's possibly the coolest short program I've written, certainly in a long time. It's really incredibly cool. And basically what this is subscribers is the number of subscribers I have right at this minute, and views is the number of views I have right at this minute. And you can press refresh and it'll update it, but in fact this almost never goes up within a time frame. I actually have this on a timer where it automatically updates it every 10 minutes, and 10 minutes is too short for me. Probably 2 hours would be a better timer. You'll actually see the numbers change in 2 hours, but in 10 minutes not so much. But in order to create this program, first we need to find a web page that has this data on it. Not only has it on it, but has it updated as soon as it happens. And that page, of course, is my my YouTube, whatever you call it, page. My YouTube personal data page. And the two fields are right here. You see the 96 subscribers and 22,235 video views that we saw before in the program. And you go, oh, well, you're going to right click on that, do inspect element the way you did in the last video, and then get the ID so you can access that data. And that would be a great idea. So if we try that, we right click, do inspect element, and come down here, and oh my gosh, it says span class equals stat dash value, and then it has the number. And if we do the same thing for this guy, exactly the same way, it's a class, not an ID. So get element by ID won't work. And in fact, I sort of hinted at this in the last video. I said get element by ID assumes there's just going to be one ID on your web page with that ID. But in fact, IDs and classes are used interchangeably, so that there's quite often a lot of IDs on the page and you'll only be able to get the first one, which is the first aspect of that program. And also, because classes and IDs are used interchangeably, you're just as likely to have a class rather than an ID that's formatting that data. And you can't get a class at all with get element by ID. So that two-part problem will initially be totally frustrating to you probably, but after you're done gnashing your teeth and rending your garments, you need to calm down and think about it and think, is there a way we can solve this problem? And in fact, one way you could solve it is if you just think of the web page as data. Just think of it as text. And then you can start to use the string manipulation functions that I talked back about in previous videos, like index of and substring and so on, and just capture the data that way. And in fact, that's exactly what I did for this program. So to create this program, we're going to just start with a form. Doesn't need to be that big, maybe a little wider. And we ought to give it a pretty cool title, like Cyborg Megas Stats. And we'll double click on this to go to the code behind. And we actually extensively want to use the form load event. But the first thing we want to do is put some global data in it, like a string constant of 01 that I'm going to use for the version number. And if you've been following my videos, you've probably seen this a number of times. And you know I really like the program when you see this, because I'm basically putting in a version number that I update in one place, and then when I come up with new versions I save old copies of the old versions, And you know I'm planning on doing quite a few revisions when you see that. The second thing we need is a web browser, of course, since the whole series of videos about web browser. And we want to create this in code rather than create it by dragging it over to the IDE, because we don't want the browser to actually be visible. And then there's a couple other items that I'll explain later. And in much the same way, there's a fairly elaborate function that I'll explain later. And this function is called load stats. And this has to do with the problem I mentioned earlier of not being able to get the data with get element by ID. So we're going to need to treat the whole document as a big piece of text and break it down with string manipulation functions. And the next thing we better do is put the actual controls, the text boxes and labels and so on, in the form, so we don't get all kinds of errors in the code I'm putting in. Save that. And the next thing we want to do is start looking at this form load event. And first we need to take our web browser and do a navigate. To the web page we were just looking at that has the data we want on it. And at this point we could put a call to our load stats, the mysterious function that actually gets the values and puts them in the right place. But the trouble with this approach is it basically won't work. And the reason it won't work is the navigate's going to be navigating to this web page, but the form load happens very quickly. And in fact the page won't be loaded at the time we call the load stats, so the load stats will just fail because there is no loaded web page. So what we really need is an event that gets fired when the web page finishes getting loaded. And as luck would have it, there is such an event. We need to go to WB browser dot document completed, which is the event in question, and then do our plus equal to add the event handler, and do tab to put in a default event handler. So this document completed won't be called until the document finishes loading, so we then can use the load stats function in order to fill in the form. So if I cut this out here and paste it in here, we should be in good shape, right? Actually there's another problem, and it's a really weird and cool problem. So why don't I just try compiling and running this to show you what it is. Assuming I can see the code here, it keeps rolling off. So I save this and run it, and you notice it fills in okay, but look at this time. Every second it's updating. It's like I have a built-in clock. And when I first saw this, I go, how the heck would that happen? I'm just calling it when the document completed event finishes. And then it suddenly occurred to me, the load stats is changing the form, or whenever it's called. So it's called every second, and basically what happens is the form changes, so it recalls the document completed. So we inadvertently created a case of recursion where WB browser document completed is endlessly calling itself as load stats keeps causing the document to be completed again. So this is definitely not what we want, although it's kind of cool. So what we need to do is take the Boolean we put in with the initial 4 values one time and use that in order to make sure this only gets called once. So I say if one time, and it's initially set to true, you see, when it's created. So that'll be true the first time. And then when we go into the if block, the first thing we want to do, since this is time critical, is make sure one time gets set back to false. And then if we call load stats, this will only get called once. It won't be constantly updating. So if we compile and run this, you notice it's called once and the clock just stays static. And what we get the first time is what we get forever, which is almost what we wanted. Except now I want to be able to refresh with the right refresh button anytime I want to check it. And I also want that 10-minute loop with the timer, so it auto refreshes every 10 minutes. So in order to accomplish that, we want to set the interval of the timer we created in the top of the page to 10 minutes. So that would be 1,000, which is 1,000 milliseconds is 1 second, times 60, so 60 seconds would be a minute, times 10, which would make it 10 minutes. And then we want to take our timer and set the tick event. And once again use our trick with the tab shortcut of adding an event handler. So do tab and we get our default event handler down here of the T10 minutes underscore tick, and it added as an event handler to the tick event. And all we want to do in the tick event handler is call our mysterious load stats function, which is one reason I made it a function, because it's called from 3 places here. So to get the third place, let's go up and double click on the refresh button, and this gives us our refresh button click event handler, and just put a call to load stats in there. And since we probably don't want to wait around 10 minutes to see if this this works, why don't we just take a look at the often mentioned mysterious function. And basically what this does is it does a WB browser refresh to make sure we're getting the latest data every time it's called. And then it uses, and this is the real trick, a property called document text, which when you convert it to string and put it in a string variable, basically loads the entire HTML document into a variable that we can then look at with our string manipulation routines. So str page now has the entire web page in it, and we do a int strloc on the index of stat value, which is that class name that contained the initial value of whichever one it was, I guess subscribers. And then we create a neighborhood size of 30 characters. So what we want to do is create a substring that's only 30 characters large around that area. So we're just looking at a localized area on the web page now. And then we do a index of greater than, which will find the edge of that class statement, and then find a index location of less than, which will find the end. So basically between these two is going to be the number itself, and then we take the length to be the end minus the beginning. But then we have to increment the beginning 1 character, because we don't want to get the greater than included in the value, and we need to subtract the length by 1 character in order to compensate for the fact that we're starting at the beginning of the number, not at the angle bracket. And then it's just a matter of doing a substring with the beginning that we've now found and the length that we've now found, and then copying that substring into the text field that's the first text box. And then the second thing is exactly the same way. But we now use a different version of index of. Instead of just using index of the value we're looking for, we use an index of the value with a starting index. So basically this says look for this value again, but look past the first value you found, because we have two classes with the same name. So you want to have a starting location that's now past the neighborhood. So that's where we have the neighborhood size is added into the initial pointer to the characters. So we're now looking past what we initially looked at and looking for the same value again in order to find the second class. And then after that, the code's more or less identical. We look for the angle brackets and get the length by subtracting the end from the beginning, and then move past the angle bracket and shorten the length and so on the same way, and then get the substring that's the new beginning and the new length, which gets our second value, the number of views. And then we put that into the text views text box. And now all that remains is to reset the time, and we do that with the DateTime.Now set to string with a format of F, which gives us that nice, pretty complex string that has the day, the date, the time, and seconds, and everything else. And then another thing I like to do is I set the this.text, which is the title of the form, to update colon and concatenate the DateTime.Now, but this time with just a T format, which is just the time of the last update. And the reason I do that is quite often you want to minimize the box, and if you minimize the box and put it in this status bar down here, it'll show the time of the last update. So you can have it running for an hour, and you just bring up the status bar and you go, oh, the last update was 10 minutes ago, and so on. So that's very useful information, mainly for when it's minimized. So basically all that remains to be done to have this a fully working program is I get the copyright character from char 169, and then I create a string at the bottom, which is YouTube love V, and I get the version number from the constant string at the top, which I change every time it's a new version. And then I put in the copyright character and the date and my name, so that it's more or less official copyright. That way if anyone rips off the code and makes a ton of money, I can sue them to get a big part of it. Although if you're planning on doing that, don't worry, we'll settle out of court. And then I just do a this.center to screen in order to put it in the center of the screen, although I almost always move it off to the side after that. So if we compile and run this, see, it takes a second for the page to load, literally about a second. And actually it has updated. There's more views now, not more subscribers. That really changes. I can have a timer that updates about every week in order to see that change. And it's not centered very well, but I can fix that off screen, so to speak. And we do a refresh. You'll notice the time updates from the refresh and the load stats, but not enough time for it to have changed. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video and learned a lot, and I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe. I want to see this number go up.